Hello everyone, I'm Dan. At the age of 12, I was faced with a choice between my dad, with whom it was always fun, and my mom, who forced me to study all the time. When I turned 10, my parents sat me down and started talking on various topics, and were especially interested in who I wanted to become. Since I was a kid, I dreamed of long journeys abroad, about pirate ships, trips to the jungle to see unusual animals. I especially dreamed of finding a secret world where dinosaurs miraculously still existed. Mom, as usual, tried to hide her grin, but Dad enthusiastically supported me. He promised to equip me with a crew and a ship, and my mother stubbornly insisted that this was nonsense, and she said that she knew exactly my talents. It was my creativity, and promised to support me. She dreamed of making me a nature painter or a science fiction writer, since I loved dinosaurs. Dad said that dinosaurs weren't just fiction, but reality, albeit history. As a result, they quarreled again. And Dad, by the way, asked who I would like to stay with. I was stunned. What did he mean with whom to stay? I loved both of them equally, and I thought that we would live together, the three of us. Oh yes, and with my puppy, Spark, that is, the four of us. Then, the divorce process lasted for a long time. Dad began to take me with him off to work, to picnics, and even to the sea. Since he had a lot of work to do, I was entertained by Jessica. We became very friendly with her. She was cool. She allowed me to do everything, bought very cool toys. Imagine, she even climbed into the fountain with me, and we ran away from there so that police would not arrest us. Then I got lost in that unfamiliar city and cried until the police found me and returned me to Jessica. I rarely saw my mother. She was boring. She forced me to read books and took away gadgets. I told my dad that Jessica was a very good helper. Then there was a court hearing where they asked me with whom I would like to live, my mother or father. I felt sorry for my mother. She sat all sad and miserable, but on the other hand, I knew that I would end up in a home quarantine with her. My mother only had a small, modest apartment, which she inherited from her grandmother, and I wanted to travel, see countries. I said that I wanted to stay with my dad, but sometimes I will come to my mom. I still feel ashamed when I remember the look in her eyes. He also told the judge that my dad had a very good assistant, Jessica, and we played in the fountain with her. The judge began to ask about this case, and my dad said that it was just a fantasy of mine. I was taken out of the courtroom. An hour later, Dad and Jessica joyfully came running to me screaming, "Victory!" The judge decided to hand me over to my dad. He kept repeating, "Dan, my baby, we won!" and invited his friends of his friends, and Jessica. We had a party in the shore of the lake with clowns, a dance group, some angels, and flowers everywhere. Everyone was in beautiful suits, and in the late afternoon, Dad and Jessica stood under an arch, and the priest approached them. Jessica was wearing a wedding dress. Were they getting married? This news overwhelmed me a little. Dad rented a cool 2-story mansion. Everywhere there were corridors, stairs, jacuzzis, flowers, maids, cooks. There was even a gym, but everything there was for adults, and I couldn't even use the bike machine. Dad and Jessica went to travel to the sea, but they did not take me with them. They were gone for almost a week, and I was left alone among the maids. And a couple of days, I got bored. I remembered something about my mom, her sad eyes, and my chest began to ache. Ugh, I wanted to see my mother so badly. The only consolation was my silly Spark, but I was tired of playing with him. He was too active. When they returned, Dad, as always, disappeared at work for most days. I wanted to talk to Jessica, as before, but she was unfriendly and did not even smile at me. Jessica was only busy with herself. Spa salons, parties, shopping. I could be with her for all those things. It would just be more interesting than being locked up for days in a huge house. When I asked Jessica to play some games together, she first came up with all sorts of excuses and then rudely dismissed it. Only when Dad came home, she smiled and stroked my head and lied to him that we were having fun. I got sad and asked my dad to take me to my mother to see her. He was in a hurry and entrusted that duty to Jessica. When we were left alone, Jessica scolded at me that I was complaining to my dad and distracting him over nothing. She shouted that I had everything: delicious food, toys, a huge house. What else could I possibly need? But one morning, when Dad left for work, she came to me, all happy and welcoming again. She probably felt ashamed. Jessica promised to take me to the sea for a real adventure with a boat, pirate compass, a treasure map, and of course, with Spark. Whoa, what a piece of news! I was in 7th heaven. Only she practically begged me not to tell anyone about it, otherwise I would not come true. Well, I knew how to keep secrets. In a day, Jessica packed everything I could need for the real sea adventure. She told me to go down through the back of the house to the back gate at 10 p.m. that evening. My personal navigator, Bill, would be waiting for me in the car there, and we would go to him and discover some fabulous islands. And she herself flew to another city to see her mother. I was waiting anxiously for 10 p.m. Time passed so slowly. Now, finally, there are 5 minutes left before it's nearly time for my exit, and my mother called. I didn't want to pick up the phone, but she couldn't stop calling. How out of place this was. Now she'll wake up all the nannies. Moreover, at this time, I still felt sleepy and thought that I was still seeing dreams. I whispered something into the phone quickly. It turned out that she had come to see me. I was standing in front of the house. Mom burst into tears that she missed me very much and begged me to come home with her and promised to give me complete freedom. To be honest, I also missed her. Her kind hands, her eyes, her smile. I faced that choice for another minute. Then I threw the phone on the bed and ran as hard as I could back to the gate. There really was a huge black car. For some reason, the door opened by itself. The light in the cabin came on and I saw my dad. Surprised, I jumped into his car and started looking around. Dad asked who I was looking for. I said that I was looking for my navigator to discover the unknown islands. And to which he said I was still quite a silly child. Then he added that he himself was also completely stupid and ordered a car to move. On the way, we picked up my mother. She kissed me endlessly, and I was so ashamed because I had just betrayed her and wanted to go on that sea trip. Since then, my mother and I moved into my father's house, and Jessica disappeared from our lives. If you liked the video, then press the like button and leave us some comments. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel.
It seems this topic with parents' divorce has become so common. I remember when I was in school, only a few children had a single mother. The rest had both parents, including me. More often, the children stayed with their mother, but I stayed with my father. And it was difficult. Very difficult. My name is Amelia. I was born into a not rich family, or rather a poor one. My parents got married when they were 20 years old. They come from large and low-income families. Later, I found out that my mother married my father only because my grandmother insisted. My mother stayed with him since my father turned out to be the right person, a respectable hard worker without bad habits. Time passed and my mother got pregnant. They worked hard, tirelessly, in physical labor. Dad at a construction site and my mom sold vegetables at the market. We somehow survived. This affected my mother's health. When she was 7 months pregnant, she suffered from a malfunction in her body and kidney failure. She passed out right on the street. In a panic, her father began to look for a taxi to take her to the hospital. There was a volunteer with a very old clunker. It was our friend. He agreed to give them a lift for free. The car barely moved. When they arrived at the hospital, my grandma came. At that time, there were still no cell phones and the internet. Granny saw her father rushing from side to side. She asked where her daughter was, and Dad said she was in intensive care. Nothing more was said to him. A few minutes later, she noticed that he was standing barefoot on the cold hospital tile. He had lost his slippers on the way and was so worried. "Your dad's hair turned gray in an hour," she told me. The doctors left the intensive care unit and said that the situation was complicated. Only one would have to be saved. My grandma fell to her knees and begged to try to keep two. The doctors nodded their heads negatively, but nevertheless entered the fight. A couple of hours later, a nurse ran past my father. She firmly held an incomprehensible white cloth in her hands, similar to a bag. Then the doctor came out and said that it seemed to work. My grandmother was crying either with happiness or with nerves. "Your baby has just been carried away by a nurse," he said. Dad and Granny ran after her down the corridor. It turns out that I was that little bag. She was born through a C-section, weighing 900 grams. "You have a girl. She's a fragile, so we'll put her in a special cell," the doctor said. For the first 3 months, my relatives saw me only through the glass. They didn't let anyone in there. A bunch of IVs was sticking out of a little head. Mom regained consciousness only a month later. The first touch was 3 months later. It was a real miracle. All the doctors in the hospital remembered us. They promised something special in my fate because we survived together. Well, then everything was in order. Of course, it was difficult, but we managed. We sorely lacked money. We didn't have our own housing, and our parents wandered around in rented apartments. The words debts and need to save have become cherished in the house. In winter, there was almost no work, so my father sold seeds standing on the streets wearing old shoes, as he saved money on winter shoes. I grew up as a sick child. I was always ill, sometimes the flu, sometimes the nosebleeds. Mom and Dad were always worried why and when I was sick. The TV didn't even work in the house. An eerie silence reigned. Later, from lack of money, endless quarrels, the fights began. Well, then friends advised my parents to go abroad. Mom volunteered first. Then I was 14 years old. Her father didn't want to let her go as he was terrified, but she couldn't be appeased. Having collected all the necessary documents, she left. I remember the day I saw her off at the airport. I was holding back tears and was silent, and she kissed my father and me, waved her hand. When we got home, the first thing I wanted to do was fall asleep, but that didn't help. Reality met me the next morning. Dad left for work. I went to school. After school, I came home and I stared at the gate. I rang the bell and didn't understand why my mother didn't open the door. And then I remembered that she was not there. When I went home, I realized there was no more ready-made, delicious hot lunch for my arrival. Me and the stove were left alone. I tried to fry potato. It turned out not much. Damp beside, burn outside. Dad came home from work in the evening, admired my cooking, but then I saw how he frowned. From that day on, I took on the responsibility for our house, learning to cook, clean, and wash clothes by hands. It seemed to me that my mother was about to arrive and everything would be as before. We didn't really talk to my dad. We didn't even know what to talk about, and we didn't also want to. He came home terribly tired and no mood, did a bunch of chores around the house. He stocked the stove, fixed something, and went to bed. There was not enough money and I decided to get a job. After school, I ran home, cooked food, and went to sing in a cafe. The earnings were small, but it was better than nothing. Dad was against it, but I decided so myself. I returned home at about 2 or 3 a.m., slept until 7, and went to school and saw every day. I got the first C's in school subjects. The former excellent student was no longer held in high esteem by the teachers. The principal noticed the dramatic changes and spoke to my father. He forced me to quit my job after a few months. I agreed and my dad got a second job. Now he was hardly at home. We both lost weight, even more, shut down. Frankly, I still had a glimmer of hope that my mother would return. Well, then we learned that she was doing well. She, it turns out, married another guy and burned bridges with a past life. I was 16 then. It's not that she crossed my dad out of her life offended me the most, but promised to return to me, to her baby, and she didn't keep her promise. My father went crazy. At some point, he became addicted to alcohol to alleviate the condition. I fought with him. I didn't want him to become a drunk. After 3 months, he changed his mind and stopped drinking. And then my mother called. She spoke with me as if nothing had happened, and I was disgusted. I was silent almost all the time and my father didn't even answer the phone. Judging by her cheerful voice, she was doing well. So, our family began to disintegrate. A few years later, I left for another city. Thanks to my father, I received a higher education and went to work in my specialty. It has been 8 years since she left. We tried to communicate with her. It seemed to me that if I didn't get angry, she would come. But on the other hand, I thought, for what? Mom has built her life long ago. Growing up, I tried to justify her actions in my eyes. Maybe she was so tired that she decided to cross everything out. Perhaps she still loves me. Simultaneously, with the resentment which became more robust over the years, a bunch of inferiority complexes crept up on me. Who needs me if my own mother refused? But thanks to my faithful friends and good work, I struggled with inner insecurity and gradually conquered it. Well, then something happened that I didn't expect. She arrived. I went to meet her at the airport and remembered the day 8 years ago when I saw her off. I wanted to give her at least 10 more chances to redeem her guilt. To do this, she just had to ask forgiveness. My heart was pounding in my chest. My grandmother was with me, holding my hand, and then an aged woman came out with a couple of suitcases. She has changed a lot. She looked like a foreigner. She smiled broadly. She were leaving for a week on a business trip. I hugged her and felt nothing. That very moment, the moment of physical touch, I decided that if nothing skipped a beat in me, I just needed to be polite. During her stay here, she tried to talk to me and blamed everything on my father and her mother. Like they forced her to marry my father. Although my relationship with my dad was not the best indicator, I felt hurt for him. And I told her what had been accumulating all these years. You can't even imagine that my father and I went through. How hungry, how deeply my father was absorbed in himself. When I finished school, you weren't there. When I entered university, when I felt bad without you. Where were you when I didn't want to leave? I screamed in tears. She didn't say anything and then left again without apologizing. 6 more years have passed since then, and yes, I still try to communicate with her. Not because I'm waiting for something, but because I don't want to be like her. Now I have a daughter myself, and I want to be the opposite example for her. Because I'm stronger than my mother, because I love my child. This is my story. Do not feel sorry for me. Everything is already in the past. Share your story below.